In the quiet town of Willow Haven, Tessa Armitage thought she'd finally found peace. A librarian by trade, she keeps her past as a covert operative buried beneath a life of quiet routine. But when a brutal act of hate thrusts her into the spotlight, her carefully constructed world begins to unravel. What begins as an attack by local extremists spirals into the discovery of a sinister web of fear and control. At its center stands Victor Rowe, a philanthropist hiding dark ambitions and a network capable of dismantling entire communities. As Tessa delves deeper, the lines blur between her pursuit of justice and the buried ghosts of her past. Because Victor isn't just the enemy, he's the brother she thought she'd lost, a man driven to darkness by the very system she once served. Fueled by guilt and a determination to right her wrongs, Tessa faces a race against time to dismantle Victor's empire before it consumes them both. But as old wounds resurface and the stakes climb higher, Tessa must answer one question: how far is she willing to go to stop a man who shares her blood? A pulse-pounding thriller packed with twists, explosive action, and emotional depth, The Shadows Between Us is a tale of redemption, family, and the fight to bring light to the darkest places. The late afternoon sun filtered through the arched windows of the Willow Haven Public Library, casting warm golden rays across the polished wooden floor. Tessa Armitage stood on a rolling ladder, her fingers brushing the spines of old books as she returned them to their rightful places. Below, a small girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, clutching a book too heavy for her tiny hands. "Tessa, can I borrow this one?" The girl's voice was eager, her dark curls bouncing as she spoke. Tessa looked down and smiled warmly. "Ella, are you sure about that? Physics for beginners isn't exactly a bedtime story." Ella nodded solemnly. "I'm going to be a scientist." "Then you better start early," Tessa said with a soft chuckle, descending the ladder. She crouched beside Ella, making the book seem less intimidating by flipping through its pages. "Take good care of it, okay? We scientists have to be responsible." As Ella and her mother left, Tessa exhaled and glanced around the library. It was her sanctuary, a quiet, predictable space where she could make small but meaningful differences in people's lives. For the briefest moment, she felt entirely at peace. Later, while walking through the town square on her way home, Tessa noticed something unusual. Near the fountain, a group of men loitered. Their eyes followed passers-by with thinly veiled malice, their laughter sharp and mean. "Tessa!" Maeve Carter called out, breaking her focus. Maeve, her closest friend, waved from her art stall on the corner, surrounded by paintings of wild landscapes and hopeful people. As Tessa approached, Maeve's smile faltered. "Do you see those guys over there?" she asked, nodding toward the group. "Yes," Tessa replied cautiously. "They've been hanging around for a while, making snide comments at anyone who doesn't look like them. Mostly targeting the shop owners." "I don't like it," Maeve said, lowering her voice. Tessa's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "They're cowards," she said, trying to reassure her friend. "If they try something, there's enough of us to stand together." Maeve studied her intently. "You talk like you've faced this before." "I've seen a lot in my time," Tessa said vaguely, glancing at the men. "Let's just hope we don't have to deal with it again here." Twilight cloaked Willow Haven as Tessa took her usual path through the woods back to her cottage. The crunch of gravel under her boots was a comforting sound, but it didn't last. A rustling behind her snapped her attention, and she paused. "Tessa Armitage," a voice sneered from the shadows. Her heartbeat quickened as three figures emerged, wearing bandanas to obscure their faces. One of them, a wiry man with cruel eyes, held a bat. "We've noticed you've been awfully comfortable around here," he said, stepping closer. Tessa forced herself to stay calm. "It's a free town," she replied evenly. "I don't owe you an explanation for where I walk." The man swung the bat lazily in the air. "See, we're not so sure about that. Maybe you need reminding of your place." When he lunged, Tessa's instincts took over. Her training from years past ignited like a long-dormant flame, and she sidestepped the swing. Her movements were fluid, calculated. In moments, she disarmed him, sending the bat skittering to the ground. She twisted his arm until he cried out, then turned her attention to the other two. "Leave now," Tessa said, her voice like steel. The men hesitated, glaring but retreating into the darkness. As they disappeared, Tessa realized her hands were trembling, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of stepping into a role she tried to leave behind. Tessa knocked on Maeve's door minutes later, her pulse still racing. Maeve opened it, her eyes widening when she saw Tessa's disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" Tessa stepped inside and relayed the attack in clipped, efficient sentences. Maeve listened with growing alarm. "This isn't random," Maeve said, moving to her desk and rifling through a pile of papers. She pulled out a flyer. "Look at this." The flyer bore the insignia of a group Maeve had mentioned before, a rising extremist faction that claimed to promote traditional values. "I think they're connected," Maeve said grimly. "And I've heard whispers that Victor Rowe's so-called community outreach programs fund groups like this." "Victor Rowe," Tessa repeated, her mind racing. She'd heard the name before, a wealthy businessman whose charitable works masked less benevolent agendas. Maeve frowned. "Tessa, this isn't something you can take on alone. We need to involve the police." "I'll think about it," Tessa interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. When Tessa arrived home, her front door greeted her with an ugly message scrawled in red paint, "Keep your place." Her chest tightened as she scanned the empty street, her senses sharper than they had been in years. She felt exposed, targeted in a way she hadn't since her intelligence days. Stepping inside, she locked the door behind her and stood in the quiet darkness of her cottage. For a long moment, she simply breathed, forcing the tension from her shoulders. Then, with deliberate steps, she retrieved a dusty lockbox from beneath her bed. Inside lay the tools of her old life, mementos and mechanisms she had vowed never to touch again. Her fingers brushed the grip of a compact pistol before pulling back. "No," she muttered. But even as she shut the box and shoved it back into place, she knew she was lying to herself. The time for quiet resistance had passed. Whatever came next, she couldn't ignore it any longer. The library was unusually quiet that morning, save for the faint rustle of pages and the occasional tap of a keyboard. Tessa sat at her desk, her brow furrowed as she scrolled through the archives of the Willow Haven Gazette. Her screen displayed article after article praising Victor Rowe's philanthropy. Each headline painted him as a saint. Victor Rowe donates $50,000 to local schools. Rowe Foundation sponsors town-wide revitalization effort. Tireless community leader Victor Rowe calls for unity in divisive times. Tessa leaned back, crossing her arms. "Unity," she muttered bitterly. "Sure, if it's on his terms." A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Tessa, you've been glued to that screen for hours. What's going on?" Maeve's petite frame appeared in the doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Thanks." Tessa took the cup and gestured to the screen. "Victor Rowe. Ever met him?" Maeve frowned. "Only at events. He's charming, but there's something off." "Why?" "His foundation's name keeps popping up," Tessa said, showing Maeve a picture of the graffiti symbol. "This was spray-painted on my door after the attack." Maeve gasped. "That's the same mark I saw at the last community rally. On some of the volunteers' jackets." "You think?" "I think this isn't just about me. It's bigger." The town square buzzed with energy as residents gathered for the unveiling of a new park bench, another gift from the Rowe Foundation. Victor Rowe stood front and center, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual crowd. "Thank you all for being here," Victor began, his deep voice carrying easily across the square. "This bench represents more than a place to rest. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we come together." Tessa, standing at the edge of the crowd, observed him closely. His polished demeanor was flawless, but his eyes, there was something cold beneath the warmth he projected. Maeve elbowed her. "He's good. Too good." "Exactly," Tessa murmured. Her gaze shifted to a group of men at the edge of the square, their jackets bearing the graffiti symbol. They weren't watching Victor. They were scanning the crowd. One of them locked eyes with her. Tessa's instincts screamed danger. Back at the library, Tessa spread out photos and notes across a table. Maeve hovered nearby, her artistic eye catching details Tessa might have missed. This symbol, Maeve said, pointing to an image, isn't just random. It's stylized. Almost like a crest. Tessa nodded. That's what I thought. I traced it back to a group called the Haven Guard. Supposedly a community watch program, but I'm guessing they're Rowe's enforcers. Maeve frowned. Why would he need enforcers? He already has the town eating out of his hand. To control those who don't fall in line, Tessa replied, her voice heavy. Or to intimidate anyone who questions him. The tension in the room was thick. Maeve finally asked, "What are you going to do?" "I need more information. And I might have to call in someone who can help." Detective Lucas Reyes didn't hide his skepticism as he sat across from Tessa at the local diner. His salt and pepper stubble caught the dim light, giving him a rugged but approachable appearance. "So," Reyes began, sipping his coffee, "you're telling me Victor Rowe is behind some kind of secret hate group?" Tessa didn't flinch. "I'm saying his foundation has connections to the Haven Guard, and they attacked me. Twice." Reyes studied her, his hazel eyes searching for cracks in her story. "Why come to me? Why not the sheriff?" "Because I need someone who'll listen," Tessa said evenly. "And I don't trust the sheriff not to sweep this under the rug." Reyes leaned back. "You seem awfully calm for someone claiming to be a target." "I've dealt with worse." He raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate?" Tessa hesitated. "Not yet. But if you dig into Rowe, you'll find enough to warrant a closer look." Reyes sighed. "Fine. I'll look into it. But if you're wrong..." "I'm not," she said, her voice firm. In the sleek office of the Rowe Foundation, Victor paced in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows. A man in a leather jacket stood at attention nearby. "She's persistent," the man said, his voice laced with unease. "Handled herself too well in the fight. Not your average librarian." Victor's lips curved into a thin smile. "No, she's not. But she's also alone. Let her dig. She'll find nothing we don't want her to. And if she does..." Victor turned, his icy blue eyes narrowing. "Then we remind her why it's better to stay in the shadows." The drizzle from the afternoon rain slicked the sidewalks as Tessa sat in her parked car, watching the man she had seen at Victor's event. He was pacing outside a rundown bar in the Whitestone Industrial District, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "I hope you're worth the trouble," she muttered, adjusting her hood. She slipped out of the car, moving quietly across the street. Her boots barely made a sound as she approached the building. The man was agitated, checking his phone repeatedly. When he finally went inside, she followed, slipping into the shadows of the poorly lit bar. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and stale beer. Tessa kept her distance, pretending to scroll on her phone while watching him out of the corner of her eye. He approached another man, passing a small envelope across the table. Tessa caught a glimpse of its contents, a flash drive. Her heart quickened. She waited for him to leave and slipped out the back, trailing him as he headed toward a nondescript warehouse. The warehouse smelled of rust and damp concrete. Tessa crept through the shadows, her every sense heightened. The man from the bar entered an office, leaving the door ajar. Through the crack, she saw him plug the flash drive into a laptop. She couldn't make out everything on the screen, but one phrase caught her eye: Phase 2, Operational Rollout. Tessa's breath hitched. Her gut told her this was significant, but she needed more. She waited until the man left the office, then slipped inside. A quick scan revealed stacks of files and a map of Willow Haven marked with red pins. Each pin corresponded to community centers, schools, and places of worship. "Targets," she whispered, her stomach sinking. She grabbed as much as she could carry, including the flash drive, and made her way out. But as she exited, a voice stopped her. "Hey! Who the hell are you? Tessa spun, her mind racing. Just lost, she said with a disarming smile, inching toward the shadows. Lost my ass. You've been snooping. He lunged at her, but she sidestepped, her years of training kicking in. With a swift motion, she disarmed him and knocked him out. Breathing hard, she whispered, still got it. Back at her house, Tessa spread the stolen documents across the kitchen table. Maeve stood nearby, her arms crossed. You broke into a warehouse? Maeve's voice was a mix of disbelief and concern. What are you thinking, Tessa? I'm thinking this isn't just about Victor Rowe being shady. Look at this. Tessa pointed to the map. They're planning something big, targeting the entire community. Maeve frowned. And you think it's up to you to stop it? What are you, some kind of secret agent? Tessa froze, the question hanging heavily in the air. I've handled situations like this before, she admitted. Maeve's eyes widened. Handled? You mean, she shook her head. Tessa, this isn't a spy movie. This is real life. You could get killed. Tessa placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. I know the risks. But if we don't act, innocent people will suffer. I can't let that happen. Maeve sighed, her resistance softening. Just promise me you'll be careful. Victor sat in his office, swirling a glass of scotch as he stared at the latest report. One of his men had been found unconscious near a warehouse, and several documents were missing. Whoever this is, they're getting bolder, he said to the man standing before him. Any leads? No, sir, the man replied nervously. But we'll find them. Victor leaned forward, his icy blue eyes piercing. Do that. And when you do, make sure they understand the consequences of meddling in my affairs. As the man left, Victor sat back, a smile tugging at his lips. So, you want to play in the shadows? Let's see how well you handle the darkness. Detective Lucas Reyes didn't look thrilled as Tessa handed him the stolen documents. They sat in the quiet corner of a cafe, away from prying eyes. You're lucky I don't arrest you for breaking and entering, Reyes said, flipping through the files. Lucky or persuasive? Tessa countered with a smirk. He sighed. This map, these pins, if this is legit, it's bad. Real bad. It's legit, Tessa said firmly. Victor Rowe isn't just funding hate. He's orchestrating it. Reyes leaned back, rubbing his temples. You're asking me to trust you a lot here, Tessa. You've clearly got a past you're not sharing. And you've got a town to protect, she shot back. Work with me on this, Reyes. We can stop him. He studied her for a long moment before nodding. Fine. But if this goes sideways, it's on you. It won't, Tessa said, her voice resolute. It's only just begun. Tessa's hands trembled slightly as she sifted through the old, faded records she had found in the dusty basement of the Willow Haven library. The documents, concealed in an unmarked box, detailed a covert project under the Department of Strategic Operations, her former employer. Among the files was a grainy black and white photo of a young man with sharp features and a familiar intensity in his eyes. She gasped. Victor. Her mind reeled as memories she had buried deep began to resurface. This wasn't just any connection to her past, this was personal. Her estranged brother, presumed lost after their family had disintegrated, was now her greatest enemy. Maeve's voice from behind startled her. Tessa, you've been down here for hours. Did you find anything? Tessa hesitated, then handed Maeve the photo. Maeve studied it before glancing back at Tessa. This is him, isn't it? Victor Rowe. Yes, Tessa whispered. And he's my brother. Maeve's eyes widened. Your brother? Why didn't you ever? Because I thought he was dead, Tessa snapped, then softened her tone. I thought I lost him years ago. I never expected this. Maeve placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure it out. Together. Later that night, Back at Tessa's house, Maeve paced the small living room, her frustration palpable. "You have to tell me everything," Maeve demanded. "No more half-truths, no more evasion. If I'm going to help you, I need the full story." Tessa sighed, sinking into the couch. "It's not a story I'm proud of. I'm not asking for perfection, Tessa. I'm asking for honesty." Taking a deep breath, Tessa began. "Years ago, I worked for an agency that operated in the shadows. They called it strategic operations, but it was anything but strategic. We carried out missions to destabilize regimes, influence populations, things I believed were for the greater good." "And Victor?" Maeve pressed. "He was my younger brother, brilliant and idealistic. After our parents died, I was his guardian. But when I joined the agency, I had to leave him behind. I thought he was safe." Tessa's voice faltered. "But my missions, they destroyed families. Communities. Somehow, Victor got caught in the crossfire." Maeve sat down beside her. "And now he blames you." "Yes," Tessa said, her voice barely a whisper. Maeve nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we need to stop him, not just for the town, but for both of you." In the luxurious confines of the Rowe Foundation's boardroom, Victor addressed his inner circle. The room was dimly lit, the sleek table reflecting the cold light of the overhead fixtures. "Our next phase begins soon," Victor announced, his tone measured but commanding. "The campaign will solidify our influence, and anyone who resists will regret it." One of his advisors hesitated. "And the librarian?" "She's been interfering." Victor's icy gaze silenced the man. "Tessa Armitage is no librarian. She's a ghost from my past, a dangerous one. But she's also predictable." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "She'll come for us. Let her. And when she does, we'll be ready." Tessa met Detective Reyes in a secluded park under the cover of night. He held a folder filled with surveillance photos and reports from his department's limited investigation into the Rowe Foundation. "This is all we have," Reyes said, handing it over. "But it's not enough for a warrant." "It's more than I had," Tessa replied, flipping through the pages. Reyes studied her, his expression conflicted. "You're hiding something. Every instinct I have tells me you're not just a librarian. What's your real story, Tessa?" She hesitated but decided to offer a sliver of the truth. "I used to work in intelligence. I've seen what men like Victor can do when they go unchecked. I can't let it happen here." Reyes frowned. "That's not much of an explanation." "It's all you're getting," she said firmly. "For now." Reyes sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fine. But if we're going to work together, I need to trust you. Don't make me regret this." "You won't," Tessa promised. Back at her house, Tessa spread Reyes's files and her stolen documents across the dining table. Maeve joined her, a steaming mug of tea in hand. "This is it," Tessa said, pointing to a blueprint of the Whitestone Industrial District. "Victor's base of operations. If we can gather evidence from here, we can expose him." Maeve frowned. "And if he catches us?" "He won't," Tessa said, her voice steely. "I won't let him." Maeve studied her friend, noting the determination in her green eyes. "You're not just doing this for the town, are you? You're doing this for him. For Victor." Tessa looked away. "If there's a chance to save him from himself, I have to try." Maeve nodded, her expression softening. "Then we'll do it. Together." The morning air in Willow Haven was thick with tension. Tessa stood by the library's front door, reading the local newspaper. The headline screamed, "Hate crimes surge as town divides." Maeve joined her, clutching a steaming coffee cup. "It's starting, isn't it?" Tessa nodded grimly. "Victor's pushing his agenda harder. The incidents are too coordinated to be random." Maeve's lips tightened. "This is exactly what he wants: fear, division, chaos. It gives him control." Tessa folded the paper and stared out at the quiet street. We're running out of time. If we don't act soon, he'll have this town in the palm of his hand. Maeve hesitated before saying, "You think Reyes can get the police involved?" Tessa's jaw clenched. "Not yet. He needs more evidence. And with Victor's resources, it's only a matter of time before he starts targeting us directly." Maeve's eyes widened. "You think he'd come after the library? After me?" Tessa placed a reassuring hand on Maeve's shoulder. "I won't let that happen. But we need to be prepared." Detective Reyes leaned over his desk, studying a map of Willow Haven covered in red markers. Each pin represented a reported hate crime in the past 2 weeks. The pattern was undeniable, concentric circles around properties linked to the Rowe Foundation. His phone buzzed. Picking it up, he heard Tessa's voice on the other end. "Reyes, I think I know where Victor's planning his next move." "Where?" Reyes asked, grabbing a notepad. "The community center near the South Square. It's hosting a cultural event tomorrow night, a perfect target for his message of fear." Reyes frowned. "You think he'd risk something that public?" "I know he would," Tessa replied. "It's his MO, high visibility, maximum impact. You need to have officers there." Reyes hesitated. "You realize if you're wrong, it'll blow what little credibility I have left." "I'm not wrong," Tessa said firmly. "And if you don't act, people will get hurt." After a long pause, Reyes sighed. "I'll see what I can do." That night, Tessa sat at her kitchen table, meticulously reviewing her notes. Maeve was in the other room, painting to calm her nerves. A sudden crash shattered the silence. Tessa bolted to her feet as smoke began to seep under the front door. "Maeve," she yelled. Maeve appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed. "What's happening?" "Out the back." Tessa grabbed her bag, which was always packed with essentials, and pushed Maeve toward the kitchen exit. As they fled into the night, flames consumed the house behind them. Tessa's sharp instincts scanned the area, spotting movement in the shadows. 2 men in dark clothing emerged, their faces obscured by masks. Tessa moved swiftly, taking down the first man with a calculated strike to his knee. The second lunged at her, but she sidestepped, using his momentum to throw him to the ground. "Tessa!" Maeve's panicked voice snapped her out of the fight. "We have to go." Tessa nodded, leaving the men incapacitated as they fled into the woods. Hours later, the 2 women sat in the dimly lit back room of Maeve's art studio. Tessa was rapping her knuckles, her mind racing with strategies. Maeve stared at her, her face pale but resolute. "This isn't just about exposing Victor anymore, is it? He's declared war on you." Tessa didn't look up. "He's sending a message. He thinks fear will make me back down." Maeve's hands tightened into fists. "Then let's send a message back. I'm tired of being afraid, Tessa. If he wants a fight, he'll get one." Tessa met her friend's gaze. "Are you sure? Once you're in this, there's no turning back." Maeve's voice was steady. "I've been fighting for this community my whole life. I'm not stopping now." Tessa allowed herself a small smile. "All right. Let's take him down." The following day, Tessa and Maeve met Reyes at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The detective's expression was grim as he examined the blueprints Tessa had spread out on a makeshift table. "This is the industrial district," Reyes said, pointing to a marked location. "If Victor has a central base, it's here." Tessa nodded. "It's heavily guarded. We'll need to be smart." Reyes frowned. "We? You're civilians. This is my jurisdiction." "Your jurisdiction doesn't have the resources to handle this," Tessa shot back. "But together, we can gather the evidence you need to bring him down." Reyes sighed. "Fine. But if this goes wrong?" "It won't," Tessa interrupted. "Victor's men think they're untouchable. That arrogance will be their downfall." Maeve chimed in, her voice calm but firm. "We're ready, detective. Let's end this." As the sun set, the trio finalized their plan, knowing the battle ahead would determine the future of Willow Haven and their lives. Tessa crouched behind a stack of crates in the dimly lit safe house, her heartbeat steady as she listened to the low murmur of voices. Maeve was a few feet away, her expression tense but determined. "Stay here," Tessa whispered. Maeve nodded, gripping her camera. Tessa crept closer to the source of the voices. Peeking through a crack in the door, she saw two of Victor's men huddled over a table covered in maps and papers. One of them tapped a laptop screen. "Tomorrow night," the man said. "Rowe wants everything in place. No loose ends." "What about the South Square?" the other asked. "It's covered. Once the distraction starts, we'll move the shipment to the industrial district." Tessa slipped back to Maeve. "They're planning something big for tomorrow. We need that laptop." Maeve's eyes widened. "How do we get it without them noticing?" Tessa smirked. "We don't." Moments later, Tessa burst into the room, catching the men off guard. Before they could react, she had one pinned against the wall while Maeve darted in and grabbed the laptop. "We've got what we need," Maeve called. Tessa released her hold, sending the man stumbling back, and the two women fled into the night. Victor sat in his office, staring at the blank wall in front of him. The news of the stolen laptop had reached him minutes earlier. "She's becoming a nuisance," he muttered. One of his advisors, a wiry man with a nervous energy, stepped forward. "What do you want us to do, sir?" Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. "Show her the cost of meddling. Ramp up the pressure. Let the town feel the weight of what's coming." "And the shipment?" Victor's eyes gleamed. "It proceeds as planned. But make sure she's distracted. I want her chasing shadows while we make the real move." The advisor hesitated. "What if she finds out?" Victor leaned forward, his voice icy. "She won't. And if she does, she won't live to stop it." Maeve stood in her studio, staring at the laptop screen. The documents and emails they'd stolen painted a chilling picture of Victor's plans: targeted attacks to incite panic, shipments of dangerous materials, and a network of enforcers ready to act. "This is it," Maeve said, her voice trembling. "This is what we need to expose him." Tessa entered, her face serious. "Are you ready to go public with this? Once it's out there, you'll be a target." Maeve squared her shoulders. "The town needs to know the truth. If I can get enough people to see what's happening, we can stop him." Tessa placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for." Maeve smiled faintly. "I've had a good teacher." Later that night, Maeve used her social media accounts and contacts to release the information, framing it as an urgent warning to the community. The response was immediate: outrage, fear, and calls for action flooded the comments. But Maeve knew it was only a matter of time before Victor retaliated. Detective Reyes paced the precinct, his phone pressed to his ear. "We have enough now," Tessa's voice came through. "Maeve's release gave us the public pressure we needed. It's time to act." Reyes glanced at the warrant in his hand. "We're ready to raid the warehouse." "But Tessa, this is going to get messy." "It already is," she replied. Reyes ended the call and addressed his team. "We're hitting the industrial district tonight. Be prepared for anything." The officers nodded, tension filling the air. As they loaded their vehicles, Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Tessa stood at the edge of the industrial district, watching as police vehicles converged on the warehouse. Maeve was beside her, clutching her camera tightly. "This is it," Maeve whispered. Tessa nodded. "Stay back. If things go wrong, get out of here." Maeve frowned. "You know I won't leave you." Before Tessa could respond, the sound of an explosion shattered the night. Flames erupted from one of the warehouses as chaos unfolded. Victor emerged from the shadows, his expression calm despite the destruction. "You're persistent, Tessa," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. Tessa froze. Victor. He stepped closer, his icy blue eyes boring into hers. I wondered how long it would take you to piece it all together. You always were the smarter one. Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched into fists. Why are you doing this? Victor smirked. Because of you. Because of what you left behind. Everything I am now is because you abandoned me. Tessa's breath caught, guilt crashing over her. Victor, I didn't know. You didn't care, he interrupted, his voice cold. But you will. When I'm finished, you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything. The confrontation ended as Victor slipped into the chaos, leaving Tessa standing amidst the flames, the weight of his words heavy on her shoulders. Tessa sat in Maeve's studio, staring blankly at the documents spread across the table. Victor's words echoed in her mind, his bitterness and anger cutting deeper than any weapon ever could. Maeve placed a cup of tea in front of her, her expression filled with concern. You've been quiet since the raid. Tessa shook her head, forcing herself to focus. He blames me for everything. For the family we lost, for the choices I made. Maeve sat across from her, leaning forward. You didn't know what would happen, Tessa. You can't carry all of that. But I did leave him, Tessa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was protecting him by staying away, but all I did was leave him to fend for himself. Maeve reached out, gripping Tessa's hand. You can't change the past, but you can stop him now. That's what matters. Tessa nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. I won't let him destroy everything. Not this time. Later that night, Tessa stood on the edge of town, waiting in the shadows. She had sent a message to her contact, hoping Victor would show. The sound of footsteps made her tense. Victor stepped into the dim light, his expression unreadable. You're bold, I'll give you that, he said, his tone laced with mockery. I'm here to talk, Tessa replied. Victor raised an eyebrow. Talk? After everything you've done? After everything we've done, she corrected. This doesn't have to end in more destruction. Victor laughed, a hollow sound. You don't get to play the savior, Tessa. You left me in the ashes, and now you want to fix it all with words? I'm trying to save you, she said, her voice firm. His gaze hardened. Save me? I don't need saving. You'll understand soon enough. He turned to leave, his parting words chilling. Next time we meet, it won't be as siblings. The following day, Tessa returned to the industrial district, determined to uncover the next phase of Victor's plan. With Reyes's intel, she located an abandoned factory that seemed to be the center of operations. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and rust. Tessa moved silently, her instincts on high alert. She found a locked room and picked the lock, revealing a stash of weapons and documents detailing Victor's final operation. Her victory was short-lived. The sound of footsteps approached quickly. Tessa grabbed the documents and darted into the shadows, narrowly avoiding detection. She slipped out through a side exit, her pulse racing. Outside, she pulled out her phone and called Reyes. I found it, she said, breathless. The factory. It's all there, good plans, weapons, everything. I'll get a team, Reyes replied. But be careful, Tessa. He knows you're coming for him. Back at Maeve's studio, Tessa spread the documents across the table once again, this time with Reyes sitting across from her. His expression was a mix of disbelief and frustration. This is bigger than I thought, he admitted. But you're walking a fine line, Tessa. You're acting like this is your personal war. It is, Tessa snapped. But it's not just about me. It's about stopping him before more people get hurt. Maeve interjected, her voice calm but firm. We're all in this together, Reyes. You've seen what he's capable of. You know we have to act. Reyes sighed, leaning back in his chair. I don't like it, but you're right. Just don't make me regret trusting you. You won't, Tessa promised, though doubt lingered in her eyes. As the sun set, Tessa stood outside the factory once again, this time with Reyes and a small team of officers. Maeve stayed behind, coordinating communication and backup from her studio. "This is it," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We take him down tonight." Reyes glanced at her. "And if he doesn't go quietly?" Tessa's expression hardened. "Then we make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." The team moved in, the air crackling with anticipation. As they approached the factory, Tessa's mind raced, her thoughts torn between the mission and the brother she had lost. Inside, the stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of not only Willow Haven but the fractured bond between Tessa and Victor. The abandoned factory was eerily quiet as Tessa led Reyes and the officers through its labyrinth of rusted corridors. The air was heavy with the smell of oil and decay, each creak of the floorboards echoing ominously. Reyes gestured for his team to spread out, his voice low. "Keep it tight. We don't know how many we're dealing with." Tessa nodded, her senses heightened. She moved ahead, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow. She paused at a door slightly ajar, motioning for Reyes to follow. Inside, Victor stood at a makeshift command center, his back turned to them. He seemed to sense their presence and turned slowly, his icy blue eyes locking on Tessa's. "So, the prodigal sister returns," he said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "Victor," Tessa began, her voice steady. "It's over. Your men are outnumbered, and we have enough evidence to dismantle everything you've built." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about winning or losing. It's about making them see the truth, your truth, my truth." Tessa stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't truth, Victor. It's destruction. And it ends now." Victor's smile faded as he gestured to the laptop on the table. "You think you can stop me? The world already knows what I've started. Take me down, and the movement will only grow stronger." Tessa's fists clenched. "Then I'll stop the movement too." Victor motioned subtly, and two of his men emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Reyes reacted instantly, drawing his gun and shouting, "Drop your weapons. Now!" The room erupted into chaos. One of Victor's men fired, narrowly missing Tessa as she ducked behind a table. Reyes and his team returned fire, forcing Victor's men to retreat deeper into the factory. Tessa moved swiftly, closing the distance between herself and Victor. He grabbed a metal rod from the table, swinging it at her. She dodged, the rod whistling past her head. "Still quick," Victor said, his tone almost admiring. "And you're still reckless," Tessa shot back, blocking his next strike with a calculated move. The fight was brutal, each blow charged with years of unresolved anger and pain. Tessa finally disarmed Victor, pinning him against the wall. "Enough," she shouted, her voice breaking. "This isn't who you are, Victor. This isn't who we are." Victor's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the hardness returned as he sneered. "You don't know me anymore, Tessa. And you never did." The commotion subsided as Reyes and his team secured the remaining men. Tessa released Victor, stepping back as he slumped against the wall. "It's over," Reyes said, his gun trained on Victor. Victor laughed bitterly. "You think this ends with me? There are others, stronger, smarter. You can't stop an idea." Tessa's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Maybe not. But I can stop you. And I can show people that fear doesn't have to win." Victor hesitated, his icy facade cracking. "You always believed in redemption, didn't you?" Tessa stepped closer. "It's never too late, Victor. You can still stop this. Help me undo the damage." For a moment, it seemed he might relent. But then his expression hardened. "I'm not like you, Tessa. I can't go back." He lunged toward the laptop, but Reyes tackled him, forcing him to the ground. Victor was handcuffed and led away as the officers secured the factory. Tessa stood by the laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maeve's voice crackled through her earpiece. Tessa, are you okay? I'm fine, Tessa replied, her voice distant. But it's not over yet. She navigated through Victor's files, finding the communication network he had used to coordinate his operations. With a deep breath, she began dismantling it, cutting off the lifeline of his movement. Maeve arrived moments later, her face pale but determined. Did we get him? Tessa nodded. It's done. But the scars are going to take a long time to heal. The sun was rising as Tessa, Maeve, and Reyes stood in the town square, watching as residents gathered, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. Maeve stepped forward, addressing the crowd. Victor Rowe has been stopped. But this isn't the end of our fight. It's the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where we stand together against fear and hate. The crowd erupted into applause, a sense of hope cutting through the lingering tension. Reyes turned to Tessa. You did good, Armitage. Even if you have a habit of making my job harder. Tessa managed a small smile. I couldn't have done it without you. Either of you. As the crowd began to disperse, Tessa looked toward the horizon, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders. Maeve touched her arm gently. What now? Tessa's green eyes glimmered with determination. We rebuild. Together.